welcome to a video. Today we're going to see if we can figure out what on earth is wrong with this thing. And with any luck, we'll get it fixed as well as figuring out what's wrong with it. My name is Alex, or Poetaster on the internet, and this segment is something I call Making It Work. And here, basically, I take things that aren't working quite the way I want them to, or the way they should, and I try to repair them. The reason I call it Making It Work is the idea isn't necessarily about restoration or getting things back to perfect working order. It's more about getting them to the point where they will work for whatever I want to do with them, or whatever project I have in mind. So in this particular case, I brought this out the other day and noticed it would not power on. So today's video is going to be all about figuring out why it won't turn on and getting that fixed up. So a little introduction in case you have no idea what this thing is. This is the Suzuki QChord, and depending on who you ask, this is either the final evolution or the horrible abomination that capped off the Omnichord line. The main difference between a QChord and the other Omnichords is that aside from being this fantastic purple with the sparkly pearl over here, this one is all digital. The previous Omnichords were all analog, I believe. Someone can correct me if there was another digital Omnichord. I think this is the only digital one. But long story short, if you're not familiar with what an Omnichord is either, the idea is you would push one of these buttons to select a chord. That chord will either pluck or drone or both, depending on how you have these settings configured. And then this strum plate over here would let you strum through the notes on that selected chord. So each one of these little blocks here contains the 3 component notes of the selected chord, and strumming along them would let you kind of play it like a guitar. And you can see here they call this a digital sound card guitar, but honestly it's closer to an auto harp, really. So you still have the strumming motion, but the way it's positioned, the way you kind of select a chord and strum it out, much closer to that than to a guitar. One of the cool things about the QChord is being entirely digital. It has a lot more options than the other Omnichords. For example, you can change full octaves, or you can even just shift the key up or down by half steps. So basically, if you're a guitar person, you can put a capo on this. It also has like 100 different voicings that you can use for the strum plate, which is also pretty cool. They're definitely pretty cheesy, late 90s, early 2000s PCM samples, but if you're into that like I am, this thing is fantastic. So the story behind this, I brought it out the other day to see if I could potentially play it. For those of you who may not know, I had a stroke about a year ago, and so while I have some partial control with this hand, I don't really have full fine motor coordination, and it tremors and kind of shakes around on its own. So me and playing guitar and things like that is totally out of the question. But I was curious to see if I would perhaps hit a point where I could work my way through, triggering these buttons with a bit of practice. And that's when I discovered that it would not turn on. So thus far what I've tried turning it on using AC power. I've also tried hooking up batteries to power it, and neither one of those has worked. So one important thing to note on this thing is that it uses a very bizarre power setup. Let me see if I can zoom in here. So you can see this uses a 12 volt center negative AC adapter, and that's a really weird one. A lot of times if it's center negative, you'll see a 9 volt, since that's really common with music equipment, but 12 volt tends to be center positive, since that's more for household items. So this one is a very odd power adapter, and that can sometimes be a reason that you end up with a unit that won't power on, is if someone's using the wrong power supply. But in this case, I already know that trick. I triple checked to make sure I'm giving it the right polarity, and I'm still getting nothing. So without further ado, I'm going to open this up, and we're going to see if we can figure out what's going on. And right off the bat, you can see there's some battery corrosion in there. I cleaned up the contacts when I first got this, but I want to take a second look at that once we are in there. Let's see. Okay, it looks like past Alex was dumb and put this piece of Velcro over a screw. I did do a really good job of putting the Velcro on there. Okay, with that opening up, a connector going to this panel here. I'm just going to go and pull that connector. It's always nice when they give you a quick disconnect. But that looks like it carries the power to the main board, as well as carrying the MIDI signals to the MIDI ports. Oh, and audio to the audio jack. Let's see. The first thing I always like to check is to check and see if we've got any broken solder joints coming in off of the power. This honestly does not look very bad. So it's just doing a visual inspection of this board. Nothing looks too terrible except for, I think when I first got this, I reflowed some points on the audio jack and did not do a great job cleaning it up. So let's fix that right now. That looks much better, but none of this should honestly have anything to do with power, and it didn't look like anything was messed up, so don't suspect that will have anything to do with our issue. Next up, I'm just going to remove this board so we can get a better look at it. There's a little bit of corrosion inside the jack. That could potentially be the cause of our problems. What I didn't see on there that I was kind of looking for was either a fuse or a big diode, something that would kind of run the polarity control. So that basically if something did get plugged in backwards, that component would stop it. Now down here it does look like we have a big diode as well as some voltage regulators. And I'm just checking visually to see if it looks like any of these voltage controllers have potentially burnt out. Usually when they do, you can see kind of like a little explosive mark coming out of them, which I'm not seeing here, which in general is a very good sign, but potentially not super helpful for finding the fault. The other thing I'm looking at are electrolytic capacitors. giving those a look over to see if they appear to be in good shape. And I have taken this apart once before. When I first got it, I just took it apart to give it a once-over general cleaning. And I remember then thinking that the construction was pretty wild. Now I'm remembering why these stacked boards are pretty cool. Now the QChord, I'm not particularly familiar with any common faults. For instance, on the Omnichords, there are a couple of common faults. The OM84, I want to say, has two boards that are held together with these big board connectors, and the solder joints on those are really prone to failure. I think the solder joints on basically any one of the Suzuki line is a little bit suspect, if memory serves. So we may do some solder reflowing on stuff that doesn't even necessarily look bad, just because a reflow may help, even if it doesn't look like it will. Let's see if we can get any hints. I'm just going to hook up our input board to this first board here, and I'm going to get my meter out and test some of these points to see what we're getting, and hopefully that will help us narrow things down. All right. First, let's start with in plus. Now I'm wondering, I have this cable that's supposed to reverse the polarity from my power supply. Now I'm wondering if it does that. This is a very cool prototyping board. It's intended for guitar pedals. But basically it's got built-in audio jacks and a barrel plug, which is really handy. And all I'm actually gonna do here is just hook up my meter and see if I am getting center positive or center negative. So I'm getting, once again, negative 12 volts. And because this is intended for guitar pedals, it anticipates getting center negative, which is what we want, but not what we are getting. So I'm going to take off that adapter and see that our adapter is not doing anything. I'm still getting the wrong polarity. So I think that may have just solved this mystery. In a potentially underwhelming way. This may be a very different video than I was thinking it was going to be. But that is part of the fun, is seeing what happens. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do, since this thing is, it's not very useful as just an extension cable, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it and see if we can just swap the polarity ourselves, make it do what it was supposed to do out of the box. First step, we're just going to lop that in half and then strip off the outer coating. And if you've watched my videos before, you'll notice I have two sets of wire strippers. These red ones that are just general around the house, car audio. These are the sizes you'd use for crimping and stuff like that, as well as a different pair, which I do for smaller electronic stuff. And these are great for stripping like these thick wires that have multiple cores inside. And what I've done, I'll zoom in when I do the next one, I've made these little hooks. Basically, we're going to make hooks on both ends so that we can pull these wires taut. It just makes soldering them together way easier. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to strip way more of this outer shielding off. That way we have some room to put shrink wrap on these individual wires. Because what we really don't want to happen is for us to make this new cable and it just becomes a fire starter cable where we're just shorting positive and ground together. That would not be very useful if you wanted to burn houses down. In which case, this is not an instructional video. Do not do this on purpose to burn someone's house down. Shrink wrap is probably the easiest and best way to keep wires from shorting. The only issue with shrink wrap is you have to remember to do it before you solder anything together. And that's why a lot of times I end up not using it, is because I simply forgot when I still had time to use it. Here's a little bit of a closer view as promised. And now before I get too far, I'm going to remember to put the shrink wrap back on. Like I mentioned before, I'm making kind of a hook shape here. And you can see that kind of handshakes with the other loop I made before. And I just realized on instinct I connected red to red. But the whole point of what we're doing is to not do that. Okay, now we're going to do this the right way. Same procedure. Basically, I've just done the same thing. Created those two hooks, made them handshake, and got them under tension. Now, I'm just gonna straighten these out as much as I can, using my tweezers to really flatten out these wires, so we get a nice clean joint. Perfect. And the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and solder this together. So that second one ended up being a horrible mess. And I'm going to pretend like I did that for educational purposes. Let's see if I can angle this so y'all can see. And now y'all can see. So there's this pretty hideous knot. And again, pretending like I did that for educational purposes. And not just that I screwed it up really bad. But basically what you can do is just dump a bunch of solder in it and then come in with your clippers after and just do a really careful job cleaning up as much of the big lump as you can without cutting any wires. You can see one of those worked the way it was supposed to, at least. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and heat shrink the good one. And the good news is we're really just keeping these from connecting against each other. There's only the two wires in this case. So as long as I have good shielding on one, we should be safe. Since this is taking on a very different form than I was expecting for this video, I will take the opportunity to demonstrate another thing you can do if you either end up in this situation or forget your shrink wrap, or in a situation where you've made a big blob like this, but then you actually have more than just two connections. And that is, you can use liquid electrical tape. And this stuff is super handy to keep around in case of a pinch. Basically, yeah, you just blob it on like a liquid plastic. and it will create a layer of insulation. Obviously, it does not look nearly as pretty as shrink wrap, but it will provide some insulation. And normally you would wait for that to dry, but in this case, since I've already got Polarity protection in place, or sorry, I should say short protection in place from my shrink wrap on the other one, I'm just going to go ahead and leave it wet, and the heat gun will probably help dry it. So first, I'm going to test this out on the prototyping board I showed y'all earlier, just to be safe before I plug it into anything. And you can ignore all this other stuff on the board, it's not doing anything. I'm just checking these two wire leads coming out of the power output that's pre-connected to this barrel jack. Alright, so you can see when I hook it up normally, I'm reading negative 11.9 volts, which is what we were getting earlier. And now, when we use our new polarity reversing cable, we should get positive 12 volts and not a fire. Let's find out what we do get. Positive 12 volts. Nothing seems to be smoking. Always a good sign. I think we are good. So I've got everything put back together except the power board. And now I'm going to see if that did the trick. Hey, there it goes. So as it turns out, giving it the correct power is all it actually needed. So turns out there was nothing actually wrong. But we did make an important discovery about my desktop power supply, and that the little polarity reverser does not work as advertised. Or didn't, now it does. So hopefully this will be helpful if you run into similar polarity issues, or you have a power supply that doesn't let you swap polarity, since a lot of music stuff uses center negative. That's really important. But yeah, let's just make sure it makes sounds. That you can hear. Yeah, you can hear each of the individual pads as I strum, as well as that drone when you pick a chord. Awesome. This is a really cool device, and now I've got that figured out, and I should be ready to put it all back together and put it to work. So I think that will wrap up this video. Always nice to get a quick and easy one, and hopefully that will help y'all out, at least if you run into something similar. It's always good to reinforce, check the simple stuff first, because half the time it really just is the simple stuff. Anyway, until next time, thanks for tuning in. Big thank you to everyone who subscribes to the channel and likes the videos and all that good stuff. And if you are interested in doing any of those things, just a preemptive thank you so much. It really does help grow the channel a ton, and it's a free thing you can do to help support putting stuff like this out there. I hope it can be a good free resource for everyone. So I really appreciate everyone's support, and I'll see y'all in the next one.